Criminal Millionaire took his housekeeper to a business dinner, and what she... Hey there, I'm Alex, your guide through today's extraordinary tale on Hearts of Crime. What you're about to witness is a story of passion and danger that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Trust me, when I say the twist at the end will leave you absolutely speechless. If you enjoy these forbidden love stories, please hit that like button and drop a comment below sharing your thoughts. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our daily uploads of these incredible stories. Stay with me until the very end. I promise the conclusion will shock you in ways you can't imagine. So sit back, relax, and enjoy today's episode. Have a wonderful day, and may God bless you and your family. The champagne bubbled in crystal flutes as Thomas Reid surveyed the private dining room at the Pinnacle. Everything was perfect, from the commanding view of the city skyline to the antique mahogany table set for 12. Tonight's dinner would seal a deal worth millions, assuming everyone played their parts correctly. "Is everything to your satisfaction, Mr. Reid?" asked the head waiter, hovering nearby. "It will be," Thomas replied, straightening his custom-tailored suit jacket. His steel-grey eyes scanned the room once more before he checked his watch. 1 hour until his guests arrived. 1 hour until Katherine arrived. Thomas hadn't a plan to bring his housekeeper to the most important business dinner of the year. The thought had never crossed his mind until that morning when his assistant called in sick and his date cancelled at the last minute. He needed someone to help manage the event, to observe and report back on his guests' behaviors when he stepped away for private conversations. Katherine Collins had worked in his mansion for less than a year. Quiet, observant, and invariably proper, she kept to herself and did her job with remarkable efficiency. Thomas barely noticed her presence most days, which was exactly how he preferred it. When he defound her that morning dusting the library shelves, he demade the impulsive decision. "Do you own anything suitable for a formal business dinner?" he asked without preamble. Katherine had turned, dustcloth in hand, her brow furrowed in confusion. I'm sorry. "A dress, something elegant." Hillard looked her over critically. With her hair pulled back in its usual practical style and wearing the plain uniform she always wore, it was difficult to imagine her in evening wear. Yet there was something about her, a natural grace in how she moved, perhaps, that suggested potential. Yes, I believe I have something," she answered, clearly bewildered. "Good. Be ready at 7. You're accompanying me to a business dinner." Hillard walked away without waiting for a response, leaving her staring after him. Now, as the elevator doors opened and Katherine stepped into the private dining room, Thomas nearly dropped his drink. The woman before him bore little resemblance to his housekeeper. Her hair fell in loose waves around her shoulders, and the simple black dress she wore fit her perfectly, revealing a figure her uniform had completely concealed. She wore minimal makeup, just enough to accentuate her features. "Is this suitable, Mr. Reid?" she asked, her voice soft but steady as she approached. Thomas cleared his throat. "Yes, you will do." He gestured to the room. "You will be seated beside me. I need you to observe the guests, particularly Benjamin Moore and Lucas Chen. Note their reactions, especially when we discuss the Blackwater property. Can you handle that?" Katherine nodded, though uncertainty flickered across her face. "May I ask what this dinner is really about, Mr. Reid?" Thomas studied her for a moment. "Real estate development. That's all you need to know." It wasn't all she needed to know, of course. The truth about the Blackwater property, the contaminated soil, the falsified environmental reports, the bribes to city officials, all of that remained carefully hidden. Tonight was about bringing in the final investors before the truth potentially leaked. Once the contracts were signed, any scandal would hurt them as much as it would hurt him. Self-preservation was a powerful motivator. "Should I pretend to be someone specific?" Katherine asked. "Your assistant, perhaps?" Thomas's lips curved into a rare smile. "No, just be yourself. If anyone asks, you're my personal consultant." The first guests arrived shortly after, and Thomas switched seamlessly into his role as charming host. Katherine watched with fascination as the man she'd known only as her stern, remote employer transformed into someone magnetic, drawing people in with his confidence and wit. "Thomas! Always a pleasure," boomed Benjamin Moore, a heavy-set man with an expensive watch and an even more expensive smile. He clapped Thomas on the shoulder before turning curious eyes to Katherine. "And who might this lovely lady be?" "Katherine Collins, my consultant on special projects," Thomas replied smoothly. "Katherine, this is Benjamin Moore, my long-time associate." "Enchanted," Benjamin said, taking her hand and holding it a moment too long. Katherine smiled politely but said nothing, already cataloguing his mannerisms as Thomas had requested. More guests arrived, including Lucas Chen, a sharp-featured man with calculating eyes who barely acknowledged Katherine's presence. As everyone took their seats for dinner, Katherine found herself observing a world she'd only glimpsed from the periphery, a world of wealth, power, and carefully concealed agendas. Throughout the appetizer course, the conversation remained light. Discussions of vacations on private islands, the performance of exotic sports cars, comparisons of rare wine collections. Katherine remained quiet, speaking only when directly addressed, but missing nothing. It was during the main course that Thomas steered the conversation toward business. "I believe you both all reviewed the prospectus for the Blackwater development," he said, his tone shifting subtly from casual to commanding. "We're looking at a potential 30% return within the first year alone. The location is prime," Lucas commented, cutting into his steak with precision. Though there were rumors of environmental concerns a while back, Katherine noticed Thomas's hand tighten almost imperceptibly around his fork. "All addressed in the environmental assessment," Thomas replied without missing a beat. "The property has been fully cleared for development." As the discussion continued, Katherine became increasingly aware that something wasn't right. The men spoke in coded language, exchanging meaningful glances. When Thomas excused himself briefly, taking Benjamin and Lucas to his office down the hall, she found herself left with the other guests, who largely ignored her after Thomas's departure. One woman, Victoria, the wife of one of the investors, slid into the empty seat beside Katherine. "First time at one of these dinners?" she asked, her words slightly slurred from too much wine. Katherine nodded, maintaining her role. "Yes, it's quite impressive." Victoria laughed, the sound brittle. "Don't to be fooled by all the sparkle, darling. These men," she gestured vaguely around the room, "they build their fortunes on quicksand, my husband included." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Especially that boss of yours. You seem like a smart girl. Whatever he is paying you, it was not worth it." Before Katherine could respond, Thomas returned with Benjamin and Lucas, all three men looking pleased. The rest of the dinner proceeded smoothly, with contracts being produced over dessert. Katherine watched as signatures were exchanged, champagne was poured, and congratulations flowed freely. Later, in the car ride back to the mansion, Thomas finally addressed her. "You did well tonight," he said, surprising her. "What did you observe?" Katherine hesitated before answering. "They were nervous about something called Blackwater. You reassured them, but I don't think they were entirely convinced." Thomas's eyes narrowed. "What else?" "Victoria mentioned that you build fortunes on quicksand. She seemed to be warning me about working for you." A tense silence filled the car before Thomas laughed, a sound Katherine had rarely heard from him. "Victoria drinks too much and talks too much. Her husband should keep her on a tighter leash." Katherine looked out the window at the passing city lights, weighing her next words carefully. "Is there something I should know about this Blackwater project, Mr. Reid? Something that might affect my position in your household?" Thomas turned to her, his expression unreadable in the dim light of the car. "Your position is secure as long as you continue to do your job well and—" He paused meaningfully. "Maintain absolute discretion about anything you see or hear while in my employ. Is that clear?" "Perfectly clear," Katherine replied, though a chill ran down her spine. For the first time she wondered exactly what kind of man she was working for and what secrets lurked behind the imposing walls of his mansion. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that Thomas Reid had recognized something in her tonight, something beyond her unexpected beauty or her quiet intelligence. He had recognized a quality he rarely encountered in his world of deceit and manipulation: integrity. And that recognition both intrigued and unsettled him in ways he wasn't prepared to examine. The days following the dinner passed in a strange dance of normalcy and tension. Katherine continued her duties as housekeeper, moving efficiently through the vast rooms of Thomas Reid's mansion, dusting shelves that never seemed to collect dust and polishing silver that already gleamed. Yet something had shifted between them. Subtle glances exchanged across rooms, conversations that lingered a moment longer than necessary. Thomas found himself noticing her in ways he never had before, the careful precision with which she arranged fresh flowers in the entryway, the slight furrow of concentration between her brows as she reviewed household accounts, the graceful economy of her movements, nothing wasted, nothing excessive. One evening, as Katherine was preparing to leave for the day, Thomas called her into his study. "Please sit," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. The room was dimly lit, a single lamp casting shadows across the leather-bound books lining the walls. Katherine sat, her posture perfect, hands folded in her lap. "Is something wrong, Mr. Reid?" Thomas studied her for a moment before speaking. "I have another event next week, a charity gala for the city's art museum. I'd like you to accompany me." Surprise flashed across her face. "May I ask why? Surely you have more suitable companions for such an event?" "You performed admirably at the dinner. You observe well, you speak when appropriate, and you don't ask unnecessary questions." He leaned back in his chair. "Besides, my usual date options are either vapid socialites or business associates with agendas." "You refreshingly straightforward." Katherine hesitated. The dinner was one thing, but a public charity event is quite different. People might misinterpret my presence. "Let them," Thomas replied with a dismissive wave. "Does it matter what they think?" "To us it might matter to you," she answered carefully. "A man in your position has a certain image to maintain." Thomas smiled slightly. "Are you concerned for my reputation, Miss Collins?" "I am concerned about maintaining appropriate professional boundaries," she corrected. "And what exactly would my role be at this event?" "The same as before. Observe, listen, report back to me." He opened a drawer and removed an envelope, sliding it across the desk. "This should cover any expenses for appropriate attire." Katherine made no move to take the envelope. "Mr. Reid, may I speak frankly?" He nodded, curious. "I am not entirely comfortable with this arrangement. At the dinner, I overheard things that suggest your business dealings may not be entirely above board. I have no desire to become involved in anything that might compromise my own integrity." Thomas's expression hardened. "You work for me, Miss Collins. Your job is to do as I ask." "My job is to manage your household," she countered, a flash of steel beneath her composed exterior. "Not to help you deceive people or facilitate questionable business practices." For a long moment, silence filled the room. Thomas was unaccustomed to being challenged, especially by an employee. Most people in his orbit either followed his lead without question or attempted to manipulate him for their own gain. Katherine's direct honesty was disarming. "The Blackwater project," he finally said, surprising himself. "You were concerned about what you overheard." "Among other things," she admitted, "Victoria Hess' warning didn't seem like mere drunken rambling." Thomas stood and walked to the window, looking out at the manicured gardens now silver in the moonlight. "The Blackwater property is a former industrial site that I acquired at a considerable discount due to potential contamination issues. The environmental assessment my company commissioned found levels of toxins just within legal limits for commercial development. Some competing assessments suggest the levels may be higher." Katherine remained silent, watching him. "Real estate development isn't tea for the faint of heart, Miss Collins. Sometimes corners get cut. Sometimes authorities look the other way when properly incentivized." He turned back to face her. "That is how fortunes are built in this world." "At what cost?" she asked quietly. The question hung in the air between them, simple yet profound. "Tell me," Thomas said, changing tack, "what brought you to work as a housekeeper? You were clearly intelligent, well-spoken, educated. This can't have been your ambition." Katherine's expression remained neutral, but something flickered behind her eyes. "We all make choices based on our circumstances, Mr. Reid. Some have more choices than others." "That is not an answer." She sighed lightly. "I worked in corporate finance for several years. The company was involved in a scandal. predatory lending practices targeting vulnerable communities. I reported what I knew to the appropriate authorities. Understanding dawned on Thomas's face. You were a whistleblower, Katherine nodded, and subsequently blacklisted from the industry. No one wants to hire someone with a reputation for having a conscience. So you became a housekeeper. It is honest work, she replied simply. And until recently, it involved minimal moral compromises. Thomas found himself fascinated by the woman sitting across from him, so different from anyone in his usual circle. Her quiet dignity, her unwavering principles despite the personal cost, her refusal to be intimidated by his wealth or position. You disapprove of me, he stated. I don't know you well enough to disapprove, Katherine replied carefully. I know you successful by conventional standards. I know you can be charming when it serves your purposes, and I know you re-involved in business practices that likely wouldn't to withstand public scrutiny. Thomas laughed, the sound harsh in the quiet room. A remarkably accurate assessment, though you missed one key detail. What is that? I am also quite lonely. The admission surprised him as much as it clearly surprised her. When you live in my world, Miss Collins, you quickly learn that everyone wants something from you. Every smile, every compliment, every gesture of friendship or attraction comes with an agenda. It's exhausting. Katherine's expression softened slightly. That sounds like a prison of your own making, Mr. Reid. Perhaps, he acknowledged, but it has a prison lined with silk and gold, which makes it difficult to gather the motivation to escape. Katherine rose from her chair. I should go, it is getting late. You haven't answered about the charity gala, Thomas reminded her. She paused, studying him. I shall think about it. After she left, Thomas remained in his study, nursing a glass of scotch and contemplating their conversation. Katherine Collins was becoming a complication he hadn't anticipated, not simply because of her unexpected beauty or her intelligence, but because in her presence he found himself questioning choices he'd long ago justified to himself. 3 days later, the carefully constructed facade of Thomas Reid's world began to crack. He was reviewing documents in his home office when his phone rang. Benjamin Moore, his voice tense. We have a problem, Benjamin said without preamble. Someone leaked the independent environmental assessment of Blackwater to the press. The Chronicle is planning a major expose. Thomas felt ice form in his veins. Who had access to that report? That's just it. Almost no one. Only the original engineers, you, me, and Lucas. And whoever conducted the assessment in the first place, Thomas added, his mind racing. How bad is it? Bad, Benjamin confirmed grimly. They have copies of both reports side by side, showing the discrepancies. They have emails discussing how to manage the situation. They hear it talking about criminal negligence, fraud, bribing officials. The works. Thomas closed his eyes briefly. How much time do we have? They are republishing tomorrow morning. Electronic edition goes live at 5 a.m. I need to call my lawyers, Thomas said, already mentally calculating damage control strategies. And Lucas, we need to coordinate our response. Lucas isn't answering his phone, Benjamin replied, his voice dropping. Thomas, I think he might be the leak. After ending the call, Thomas sat motionless at his desk. Years of careful maneuvering, of building his empire brick by corrupt brick, all potentially undone in a single news cycle. He was still sitting there an hour later when Katherine knocked lightly on the open door. Mr. Reid, is everything all right? You missed dinner. Thomas looked up, his face a mask of control despite the turmoil beneath. Everything's fine. I'm not hungry. Katherine hesitated in the doorway. You have a visitor. A Mr. Chen is here to see you. He says it is urgent. Lucas. Thomas felt a surge of anger. Show him in. Katherine nodded and disappeared, returning moments later with Lucas Chen, whose usual immaculate appearance was noticeably disheveled. His tie was loosened, his hair uncharacteristically mussed. Leave us, Thomas instructed Katherine, who quietly closed the door as she departed. You have some nerve coming here, Thomas said coldly once they were alone. Lucas sank into a chair, his face ashen. I didn't leak the reports, Thomas. I am being set up same as you. Benjamin thinks otherwise. Benjamin is covering his own tracks, Lucas countered. Think about it. Who had the most to lose if this project went south? Who insisted on doctoring the environmental assessment in the first place? Thomas S. eyes narrowed. You were the one who found the cooperative inspector. On Benjamin E.S. recommendation. Lucas leaned forward. I've been looking into things since I got wind of the leak this morning. The paper trail leads back to Benjamin, not me. He's been preparing for this, Thomas. He's been liquidating assets for weeks, moving money offshore. Thomas felt the beginnings of doubt. Benjamin had indeed been unusually insistent about accelerating the timeline on Blackwater. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Katherine opened the door slightly. I'm sorry to disturb you, but there are 2 men at the front door. They say they're from the FBI and they have a warrant. The room seemed to freeze. Lucas went pale, and Thomas felt a sensation he hadn't experienced in years. Pure, unadulterated fear. Stall them, he instructed Katherine. Tell them I'll be right there. When she closed the door, Lucas was already on his feet. Back exit? So as through the kitchen, past the pantry, door on the left, Thomas replied mechanically, his mind racing. Keys to the guest house are in the drawer by the door. Wait there until I contact you. Lucas nodded and slipped out through the connecting door to the hallway. Thomas took a deep breath, straightened his tie and prepared to face the federal agents waiting in his foyer. Years of business negotiations had taught him to project confidence regardless of circumstances. He would deny everything, refer them to his attorneys, reveal nothing. But when he stepped into the foyer, the scene was not what he expected. Katherine stood speaking quietly with the 2 men, who indeed wore FBI jackets. But rather than the aggression he anticipated, the agent's demeanor was respectful, almost deferential. Mr. Reid, one of them said as Thomas approached, sorry to disturb you at home. We wanted to inform you personally that we have uncovered a cybersecurity breach targeting your company. We believe corporate espionage may be involved, potentially from foreign actors. Thomas kept his face carefully neutral despite his confusion. I appreciate the notification. What exactly was compromised? We were still determining the full extent, the agent explained, but it appears they were particularly interested in your Blackwater development project. We have reason to believe confidential documents have been stolen and potentially altered before being distributed to third parties, including the media. Thomas S. gaze flickered briefly to Katherine, who was watching the exchange with an unreadable expression. I see, Thomas replied slowly. That's concerning. How should my company proceed? We recommend full cooperation with our investigation, the second agent said. That would include providing original copies of all documents related to the project, so we can determine what may have been falsified by the intruders. Thomas felt a cold realization dawning. This wasn't about arresting him. This was a gift-wrapped opportunity to claim that any damaging documents were forgeries created by hackers. Someone had just thrown him a lifeline. But who and why? After the agents left, promising to return the next day with the proper paperwork, Thomas turned to Katherine. Did they say anything else before I came down? She met his gaze steadily. Just that they were responding to a tip about potential foreign interference in American business interests. They seemed quite concerned about protecting your company's reputation. Thomas studied her face, searching for any sign that she understood the absurdity of the situation. And Lucas? Did you see where he went? Mr. Chen asked me to show him to the bathroom, as Katherine replied. If he left the house afterward, it was never through the front door. Something in her tone made Thomas certain she knew exactly where Lucas had gone. Miss Collins, what exactly did you do before you worked in finance? A ghost of a smile touched her lips. I specialized in risk assessment and crisis management, Mr. Reid. It seems some skills never quite fade away. For the first time in his adult life, Thomas Reid found himself completely unsure of his footing. The woman standing before him, his housekeeper, whom he had barely noticed for months, had just potentially saved his empire with a few careful words to federal agents. But why? Why would you help me? He asked bluntly. You made your opinion of my business practices quite clear. Katherine considered him for a long moment before answering. First, I believe people can change when given the right motivation and opportunity. Perhaps this is yours. You think a near miss with federal prosecution will reform me into an ethical businessman? Thomas asked incredulously. I think it might cause you to reconsider what you truly value, she replied simply. Now, if you will excuse me, I've had a rather long day. I'll see you in the morning. Thomas watched her walk away, her composure perfect as always, leaving him with more questions than answers. In the space of a few hours, his world had been threatened, rescued by the most unlikely ally, and fundamentally altered in ways he was only beginning to comprehend. And somewhere in the chaos, he realized with startling clarity that Katherine Collins had become the most fascinating person in his life, a woman who had seen the worst of him and still, inexplicably, believed he could be better. As he returned to his study, Thomas noticed the envelope of money still sitting untouched on his desk, where he had left it days ago. Beside it now lay a handwritten note in Katherine's precise handwriting. I've reconsidered your invitation to the charity gala. My answer is yes, but I'll provide my own attire. No payment necessary for doing the right thing. Thomas sat at his desk for a long time holding the note, feeling as though he stood at a crossroads he hadn't seen coming. The path forward was unclear, but for the first time in years, he felt something like hope stirring within him. Hope that perhaps it wasn't too late to rebuild his life on a different foundation. What he didn't yet realize was that forces were already in motion that would test this newfound desire for redemption in ways he couldn't imagine. Benjamin Moore would not take the threat of exposure lightly, and Katherine's intervention, however well-intentioned, had only bought them time, not absolution. The real storm was still gathering on the horizon. The night of the charity gala arrived with a sense of anticipation Thomas had not felt in years. The Chronicle had published a watered-down version of their planned expose, citing conflicting information about the Blackwater development and mentioning the ongoing FBI investigation into possible corporate espionage. The story had caused ripples rather than waves, enough to draw concerned calls from investors, but not enough to trigger the collapse Thomas had feared. He stood in the foyer of his mansion, adjusting his bow tie while checking his watch. Katherine had insisted on making her own way to the museum, saying she had errands to run beforehand. Thomas had acquiesced, though not without a strange sense of disappointment. His phone buzzed with a message from Lucas. Benjamin EOS been making calls to all our major investors. Watch your back tonight. Thomas slipped the phone into his pocket just as his driver announced the car was ready. The temporary reprieve Katherine had engineered wouldn't last forever. Benjamin was clearly mobilizing against him, and Thomas needed to be prepared. The art museum glowed with tasteful lighting as he arrived, its neoclassical facade serving as a backdrop for the procession of wealthy patrons in formal attire. Thomas nodded to acquaintances as he made his way inside, scanning the crowd for familiar faces, allies, enemies, and those who could be either depending on which way the wind blew. Benjamin was already there, holding court near the bar, his robust laugh carrying across the room. Their eyes met briefly, Benjamin raising his glass in a mock toast that only Thomas would recognize as a threat. "Mr. Reid," came a warm voice from behind him. Thomas turned and momentarily lost his composure. Katherine stood before him in a deep blue gown that draped elegantly over her figure, her hair swept up to reveal the graceful line of her neck. She wore minimal jewelry, simple pearl earrings and a delicate silver bracelet, yet somehow outshone the women dripping in diamonds around them. "Ms. Collins," he managed, aware that several nearby conversations had paused as people took note of his companion. "You look remarkable." A slight smile touched her lips. "Thank you. The museum collection is quite impressive. I was just admiring the new installation in the East Wing." As they moved through the crowd together, Thomas became aware of a subtle shift in the dynamics around him. Katherine wasn't behaving like the housekeeper he knew. She moved with confidence through the social environment, engaging effortlessly in conversations about art, literature, and current events, revealing dimensions of herself he'd never glimpsed before. "You are full of surprises," he murmured, as they paused by a Renaissance painting. "Everyone has layers, Mr. Reid," she replied. "Most people simply never get the opportunity to show them all." As the evening progressed, Thomas found himself increasingly drawn to her company, almost forgetting the business concerns that had initially prompted him to bring her. They were examining a contemporary sculpture when Benjamin approached, his wife Victoria trailing behind him with a glass of champagne already half empty. "Thomas," Benjamin boomed, clapping him on the shoulder. "And the lovely Miss Collins, we meet again." Katherine smiled politely. "Mr. Moore, Mrs. Moore, how nice to see you both." Victoria's gaze sharpened as she looked between Thomas and Katherine. "Still working for him, dear, after everything?" Benjamin laughed too loudly. "My wife, always the dramatic one. I'm sure Miss Collins finds employment with Thomas perfectly satisfactory." He lowered his voice, leaning closer to Thomas. "A word in private, about our mutual concerns." Thomas nodded, excusing himself, as Benjamin led him toward a quieter corner of the gallery. "The FBI visited my office today," Benjamin said once they were alone, his jovial mask slipping, "asking very specific questions about altered documents and financial transfers." "I received a similar visit," Thomas replied neutrally. "Corporate espionage is a serious concern." Benjamin's CS eyes narrowed. "Cut the crap, Thomas. We both know there is no hacker. Someone else trying to divert attention, and my money is on Lucas. The little snake is trying to save himself by feeding them information about us." "What exactly are you suggesting?" "I am suggesting we present a united front," Benjamin replied. "Give them Lucas on a silver platter. Between your resources and mine, we can make sure all evidence points to him acting alone." Thomas considered the man before him, a business partner of many years, someone he trusted as much as he trusted anyone. Now he found himself wondering if Katherine had been right about Benjamin setting them all up. "Let me think about it," Thomas said non-committally. "Tonight is not the place for these discussions." Benjamin's affable expression hardened. "Don T, wait too long. By tomorrow, my offer of partnership might become something less friendly." As Benjamin walked away, Thomas felt a presence at his side. Katherine had approached silently, her expression concerned. "Trouble?" she asked quietly. "Benjamin wants to align against Lucas," Thomas replied. "Suggests we offer him up as the sole culprit." Katherine watched Benjamin rejoin his wife across the room. "And what will you do?" Before Thomas could answer, his phone buzzed with a message. He checked it, then looked up at Katherine with tension evident in his features. "I need to step out for a moment. Wait here." Thomas made his way to the museum's rear entrance, stepping into the quiet garden illuminated by strategically placed lights. A figure emerged from the shadows, Lucas looking even more disheveled than when Thomas had last seen him. "This better be important," Thomas said. "Being seen together right now isn't wise." Lucas thrust a USB drive into Thomas's hand. "Everything you need is here. Account numbers, transfer dates, communications with the original environmental engineers, instructing them to alter findings. All of it leads back to Benjamin." "And why are you giving this to me?" "Because I am leaving the country tonight," Lucas replied, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "And because, despite everything, I believe you might actually do the right thing with it." Lucas disappeared into the darkness, leaving Thomas holding what could be either salvation or ruin in his palm. He slipped the drive into his pocket and returned to the gala, his mind racing with possibilities. Katherine was engaged in conversation with Victoria Moore when he returned, the two women standing apart from the main crowd. As Thomas approached, he caught the tail end of their exchange. "He's not who you think he is," Victoria was saying, her words slightly slurred. "Benjamin says he is going down for all of it. You should distance yourself while you can." "Thank you for your concern," Katherine replied calmly, noticing Thomas's approach. "If you'll excuse me." As Victoria moved away, Katherine turned to Thomas. "I believe our evening might be more complicated than anticipated," she said softly. "We need to leave," Thomas replied, placing a gentle hand at the small of her back to guide her toward the exit. "Now." The drive back to the mansion passed in tense silence. Thomas lost in thought as he considered his limited options. The USB drive in his pocket represented a potential way out. But at what cost? Betraying Benjamin, a man who, despite his many flaws, had been by his side through countless deals and challenges. Yet Benjamin had clearly been prepared to sacrifice him, without hesitation. As they entered the mansion, Thomas turned to Katherine. "I need your advice." Her eyebrows rose slightly in surprise. "My advice." "You were right about Benjamin," Thomas said, leading her into his study and closing the door. "Lucas provided evidence that he's been orchestrating everything, including setting us up to take the fall." Katherine sat in the chair across from his desk, her formal gown pooling around her. "And what are you considering doing with this information?" Thomas poured himself a drink, not offering one to Katherine as he knew she did not partake. "I have 3 options as I see it. 1, I could use this to save myself by turning Benjamin into the authorities. 2, I could leverage it to force Benjamin into a stalemate where we both walk away damaged but intact. Or 3, he hesitated. 3, Katherine prompted, I could do as you once suggested. Take this as an opportunity to change, to clean up my business practices entirely, starting with making the Blackwater situation right. Katherine studied him, her expression thoughtful. "And which option appeals to you most?" Thomas laughed humorlessly. "A week ago I wouldn't have even considered the third option. Now," he met her gaze, "now I find myself wondering what kind of man I want to be. So the fact that you were asking that question suggests you already know the answer," Katherine said quietly. Thomas set his glass down, untouched. "Option 3 would mean substantial financial losses, years of legal battles, possible criminal charges, though those could likely be mitigated with cooperation. Yes, it would mean the end of my reputation in certain circles, the collapse of business relationships I've spent decades building. Also, yes," Thomas moved to the window looking out at the night. "Why did you help me with the FBI? You could have let them take me down." Katherine was silent for a long moment before answering. "Because I saw something in you that perhaps you've forgotten was there. A capacity for change, for goodness." Thomas turned to look at her, this woman who had entered his life so quietly, yet had somehow shifted its entire foundation. "You barely know me." "So I know enough," she replied simply. "I've worked in your home for nearly a year. I've seen how you treat people when you think no one important is watching. The gardener with the sick child whom you quietly continued to pay during his months of absence. The scholarship fund you anonymously maintain for underprivileged students. The fact that despite your wealth and power, you still sometimes sit in the kitchen late at night, making your own sandwich because you don't want to bother the staff." Thomas felt strangely exposed, as though Katherine had seen through carefully constructed walls he'd maintained for years. "Those are small things," he said dismissively. "They revealing things," she countered. "They show the man you could be if you stopped believing the only path to success is corruption." Thomas moved to his desk, taking out the USB drive and turning it in his fingers. "If I choose option 3, the clean break, the fresh start, would you—" He trailed off, uncertain how to articulate what he was asking. Katherine rose from her chair and approached him, stopping just close enough that he could catch the faint scent of her perfume. "Would I what, Thomas?" And it was the first time she had used his first name, and something in her tone gave him the courage to continue. "Would you consider staying? Not as my housekeeper, but as—" He searched for the right words. "As someone who might help me navigate this new path. Someone who sees the better version of myself that I'm not sure I can find on my own." Katherine's expression softened. "Are you offering me a job or something else entirely?" "So I'm not entirely sure," Thomas admitted with a rare moment of complete honesty. "I just know that when I imagine making these changes, doing the right thing, as difficult as it might be, you're a part of that vision." Katherine reached out and gently took the USB drive from his hand. "First, let us deal with this situation, then we can discuss what comes next." The following weeks unfolded in a whirlwind of activity. Thomas, with Katherine's guidance, took the evidence against Benjamin to his lawyers, instructing them to cooperate fully with federal authorities while negotiating for leniency in exchange for his testimony. Simultaneously, he announced a complete halt to the Blackwater development, citing newly discovered environmental concerns and promising full remediation of the site. Benjamin Moore was arrested at his country club, the evidence against him overwhelming once Thomas and Lucas both agreed to testify. Victoria, despite her husband's betrayal, seemed almost relieved by the collapse of their carefully constructed facade. The financial consequences for Thomas were significant, but not catastrophic. His company ES stock plummeted initially, then began a slow recovery as the market responded to his transparent approach to addressing the scandal. Several board members resigned in protest of his decision to cooperate with authorities, but others, those with longer views and stronger ethical foundations, remained. Throughout it all, Katherine stayed. She resigned her position as housekeeper, but accepted a new role as compliance officer for Thomas's company. Her background in finance and ethics making her perfectly suited to help restructure the organization. Their professional relationship developed alongside a more personal connection that grew gradually, built on mutual respect and shared values rather than the power imbalance that had defined their earlier interactions. 1 year later, Thomas stood in his backyard, watching guests mingle on the lawn for the first fundraiser hosted at his home since the scandal. The event was supporting environmental restoration projects, a cause that held personal significance now. "The mayor just arrived," Katherine said, appearing at his side. She looked elegant in a simple green dress, her hand brushing lightly against his as she handed him a glass of water. "Are you ready for the announcement?" Thomas asked, his eyes meeting hers. Katherine smiled. "The Blackwater Nature Preserve? I think it's a wonderful initiative." Thomas nodded. "From toxic development to public wetlands. Not a transformation I would have imagined a year ago." "Speaking of transformations," Katherine said, her voice warm. Lucas called from Buenos Aires. "The ecotourism venture is exceeding expectations. He seems to have found his own path to redemption." Thomas looked out at the gathering, so different from the business dinners and charity galas of his past. These were people committed to real change, to building something sustainable rather than merely profitable. Among them were former colleagues who had chosen to join him on this new path, as well as new allies drawn to his reformed approach to business. "I keep waiting for regret to set in," he confessed quietly to Katherine. "For the moment when I miss the power, the ruthlessness, the simplicity of caring only about profit." Katherine turned to face him fully. "And has it?" "No," Thomas replied, surprising himself with the realization. "I find I don't miss that life at all. Though I do occasionally miss having someone to make my late-night sandwiches," he added with a smile. "I believe I can still manage that particular skill," Katherine laughed, her eyes bright with affection. As the sun began to set over the garden, Thomas prepared to address his guests. Before stepping forward, he took Katherine's hand, intertwining their fingers. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" "For seeing something in me worth saving. For believing I could change when I wasn't sure of it myself." Katherine squeezed his hand gently. "We all deserve the chance to rewrite our stories, Thomas. Some just need a little help finding the right words." As Thomas moved to the small podium to announce the creation of the Blackwater Nature Preserve, he caught a glimpse of a familiar face in the crowd. Victoria Moore, now divorced from Benjamin and rebuilding her own life. She raised her glass slightly in acknowledgement, a gesture of respect between survivors of a shared past. Thomas began his speech, outlining his vision for transforming the once contaminated industrial site into a protected ecosystem that would serve the community for generations to come. As he spoke, he could feel Katherine's gaze upon him, supportive, proud, loving. Later that evening, as the last guests departed and the staff cleared away the remains of the event, Thomas and Katherine walked together through the quiet garden. "Benjamin's sentencing is next week," Katherine remarked. "Will you attend?" Thomas considered the question. "No, that chapter is closed for me. I've given my testimony, done what was required. Now I'd rather focus on building something new than witnessing the final collapse of something old." Katherine nodded, understanding. "And what exactly are we building, Thomas?" she asked, stopping beneath the arbor, where white roses climbed toward the night sky. Thomas turned to her, taking both her hands in his. "Something honest, something meaningful." He paused, searching for the right words. "When I was at my most lost, you showed me that integrity isn't a liability. It is the only foundation worth building upon. Every day since then has confirmed that truth." Katherine's eyes shimmered in the soft lighting. From housekeeper to moral compass, Quite the career change. From employer to partner, Thomas countered, drawing her closer. Quite the relationship change. Partner in business or partner in life? Katherine asked, a hint of vulnerability in her question. Both, Thomas replied without hesitation. If you will have me. Their kiss beneath the roses sealed a promise neither had anticipated making when they first met. A promise to continue walking this new path together, their unlikely beginning transformed into something far more precious than either could have imagined. In the mansion that had once housed secrets and schemes, a different kind of power now resided, the power of redemption, of second chances, of love built on the courage to change and the wisdom to recognize what truly matters. And in the quiet moments when doubt crept in, when the challenges of maintaining their ethical standards in an often unethical world seemed overwhelming, Thomas and Katherine would remind each other of how far they had come, and how the most valuable fortunes aren't counted in dollars, but in the lives touched and the legacy left behind. For Thomas Reid, once driven solely by profit and power, had discovered something Katherine Collins had known all along, that a life of integrity, though sometimes more difficult, offers rewards that no amount of money could ever purchase. The greatest of these rewards stood beside him now, her hand in his, as they looked toward a future neither had dared to imagine, a future built not on quicksand, but on solid ground. Wow, I told you that ending would be unexpected. If you enjoyed this story, please give this video a thumbs up and share your reactions in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to Hearts of Crime for more captivating stories, just like this one every single day. Click on the video appearing on your screen right now for another incredible tale of love in the criminal underworld. Thank you for watching until the end. May God bless you and your family, and I'll see you in the next video.